Yep.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Expert, the podcast where we speak with the people shaping the future of offshore wind. I am your host, Serene Hamshaw, and today we're turning our attention north to Canada, where new legislation and global partnerships are starting to position the country as a serious player in offshore wind. And to help us understand what's really happening on the ground, I'm really thrilled to welcome Adrienne Downey. Adrienne is the director of Offshore Wind with the energy consulting group Power Advisory, whose practice spans both Canadian and US markets. Prior to this role, Adrienne led the North American activities for Hexicon, offshore wind developer and technology provider. And before that, she led the inception of New York State's nation-leading offshore wind program. And most importantly, she is an AOWA's esteemed faculty member. Adrienne, welcome. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Serene. Delighted to be here. It's always an honor to collaborate with you and to serve as a proud faculty member. So delighted to be here. Let's go north.
Thank you. Thank you for joining the podcast. So, Adrienne, let's dive right in. Can you give us a snapshot on where things currently stand with offshore wind in Canada? What's happening, and what should we be paying attention to?
It's been an exciting couple of months. Well, actually, I should say exciting couple of years. So the big news, of course, is October 2024. Last fall, we had the passage of Bill C-49. And for those who are not in the weeds of Canadian legislature, this was a big deal because it reopened a series of legislation that is dubbed the Atlantic Accord. So where in the United States, you don't have, a clear distinction, 3 nautical miles, and then the rest is federal water. In Canada, those shared resources are really governed by the Accord agreements, the Accord Acts that help to navigate the, shared resources that are the Atlantic ocean coastlines and resources, that serve Newfoundland, Labrador, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and I guess even parts of the Gaspésie in Quebec. So to reopen those was a big deal. They hadn't been opened again since the 1980s, and were basically only, with regards to energy, concentrated on petroleum. And so creating a broader definition of energy is really the formal pathway towards enacting upon what had been a couple of years of significant advancements. In 2022, Premier Tim Houston of Nova Scotia, announced very bold vision for offshore wind, signaling a desire to have 5 gigawatts of leasing by 2030. But absent the corroboration from the national legislation, from the Accords, it was difficult to put that into practice. So really, Bill C-49 unlocks the legal framework and affirms the regulatory framework that has also been, very much in focus over the past 2 years, with the regional assessments for both Newfoundland, Labrador, as well as for Nova Scotia, having been completed in January of this year. So, the ground has been set, and now we have legislation to make it happen.
That's an exciting momentum, and looks like that truly unlocked the Canada's offshore wind potential, or hopefully it will. Let's talk about the offshore wind projects from an investment perspective.
Mhm.
Capital costs can be significantly high and higher, way higher than onshore projects. What
Mhm.
strategies do you think Canada should prioritize to attract private investment and ensure these projects are both economically viable and environmentally sustainable?
Yeah, well, I think the other, incredibly exciting piece of news just this past month in March was the announcement of 5 wind energy areas for consideration. The government of Nova Scotia, in particular, is asking for feedback by
Mhm.
April 14th on their proposed lease areas, and they've already taken a lot of feedback from industry and stakeholders, in coming to those preliminary areas. So, thinking about what is an economic size for a wind farm, floating versus fixed bottom. And so the portfolio is mixed. And the questions really then become, route to market. So, whether it's domestic load, displacing coal-fired resources, which are still extensive in Atlantic Canada. Looking at load growth, of course, from beneficial electrification, but also, and this is a little bit dicey, also very current events, the question of transmission, to the south. ISO New England has huge calls for decarbonization within its plans, and so there's been a lot of momentum in terms of not only local usage, helping to enable mandated closures of polluting fossil fuel generation that are also on the cusp of retirement. It's time, as well as the potential for export. So route to market, making sure that the leases are of sufficient size, is in perfect complement to the massive amount of wind in the region. And I would also point significantly to the leadership in the region that has already been doing a lot for economic viability and sustainability. So major port investments already at the Halifax Port Authority, Nova Port, Offshore Wind Supply Chain Hub, Atlantic Energy supply chain assessments. I mean, these are all initiatives that have been really percolating in the past 3 to 4 years to showcase, that there is skilled workforce, competitive workforce, and significant infrastructure, and they're already putting their money where their mouth is, and towards upgrading and mobilizing those resources. So there's been a lot happening from an economic viability perspective, as well as sustainability.
And has there been any discussion around the timeline of these projects? You mentioned these 5 wind areas. Is there any timeline set in the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. So the timelines are always a little bit in flux, but following the April 14th comment period that's coming up, make sure you get your comments in. It is anticipated, or is the goal, to get those lease areas moved towards auction by the end of 2025. So that could move very quickly.
Yeah.
There's still some details with regards to what is an auction and how does it look like, and how does it function. But those consultations are likewise going on. So it could be that we have lease areas that are held, and with private investors developing them by as early as 2026, which is exciting.
It is actually exciting. And speaking of the transmission and going south, there's also this bigger picture, right? Canada recently joined the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, and there is a talk of subsea cables connecting clean Canadian power to places like the UK. What role do you see Canada playing in the global offshore wind market over the next decade?
Yeah, well, there's 2 major roles. One is transmission, of course, but globally, and shout out to Laurence Seglin, who's been, I think he calls himself the lowly standard bearer of a 2,200 mile proposed North Atlantic transmission one link. I mean, no small feat, and provocatively dubbed NATO the NATO link. But that's one opportunity globally. The other is green hydrogen. So there's been a huge discussion in Atlantic Canada on green hydrogen and how that part is part of a national hydrogen strategy for Canada, but also major focus internationally. So Germany and Canada have a memorandum of understanding towards developing green hydrogen solutions at scale, particularly for Germany's hard to abate sectors. And just last year actually signed an agreement for 600 million contributed each 50-50 between Canada and Germany in order to facilitate and expedite the growth of that resource. And this reflects, a broader discussion on global alliances, that has been unfolding really since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, right? So looking at diversity of energy structures, and strong allies who are, politically stable and solid partners.
Adrienne, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Offshore wind in Canada clearly has a big future, and we can see it happening now. And it's been great, really, to hear your perspective on how it's coming together. Before actually we go, where can people stay up to date with developments in Canadian offshore wind? Or websites?
Definitely. Yep, definitely. So you can follow more like the regulatory side of things, Natural Resources Canada, or NRCan, and significant shout out to Minister John Wilkinson for his leadership over the past number of years. Also with Premier Tim Houston's work, province of Nova Scotia is always, posting updates on the subject. The regional assessments are all public, and you can continue to follow on and become part of their listservs. And if you don't want to source all of these individual items, hit up Marine Renewables Canada, or MRC. They are the industry association that has been supporting offshore wind development and other marine renewables in Atlantic Canada for many years now. And MRC is an awesome one-stop shop for all the latest and greatest.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adrienne. That's all for today's episode of Ask the Expert. And actually, if you would like to learn more about what's going on in the market, Adrienne actually has a course on policy and regulations coming up this year, as well as a module on policy and regulation and upskilling course also coming this summer. So if you'd like to learn more about it, just visit us at AOWA.com. And for those watching us, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay inspired, stay curious. Thank you again, Adrienne, and see you next time.